Greetings everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am Ken McAuliffe, the jazz vinyl audiophile, and I wanted to do a rundown of my top jazz reissues on vinyl of 2023. Now this is not my top 10, my top 15, it's more like my top 25. So sit back, have a drag on your fake cigarette, or light up a doobie, or have a cup of coffee. I love the smell of coffee in the morning. And these are in no particular order. Alice Coltrane, Ptah the El Daoud, however you say that. This is the reissue. This is my 1971 original copy. I've never seen one of these originals without really heavy ringwear, which this one has. But regardless, this is an incredible record. Most people who are into Alice Coltrane are waiting for these records to be reissued, and they're really taking their time because they are nigh impossible to find out in the wild. And I was incredibly impressed with the transfer of this. Whoever cut the lacquers, it's not in here, did an amazing job, because this is one of the closest to the original pressings I've ever heard. The bass is really full. Everything is super clean, super up front. This is a dead quiet pressing. I think Third Man did one as well. I haven't heard that one, but this is by UME Impulse and really sounds fantastic. This is really the basis. I really prefer her first record, Monastic Trio, but her records are the basis for what we now call spiritual jazz. I guess Coltrane's records are. It's kind of weird because the whole Coltrane, the latter period where he's just blowing down the walls with that incredible frenetic, almost military-like machine gun approach, not to be confused with Peter Brosman machine gun, but that's probably where he got the idea. It is just, you know, that era of Coltrane is, I can't even listen to it. I like a lot of free jazz, but that latter period Coltrane is like he's just out to destroy something, even though I'm sure that's not his intent. But Alice Coltrane's records are the opposite. They're incredibly meditative and comforting and circular and embracing. They're very warm, so maybe they were opposites in that way. But this is a wonderful record, which includes Pharoah Sanders, Joe Henderson, Ron Carter, and Ben Riley. What an amazing, Ben Riley from I played with Monk at that time. What an amazing lineup. From 1960, the Miles Davis Quintet, Workin, with John Coltrane, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones. This is a wonderful craft reissue. Kevin Gray, of course. This sounds pretty close to my original. See, in my opinion, I mean, it's an old story. Almost never does a reissue better, in my opinion, on my system, an original pressing. Now, I have tube gear and horn speakers and the kind of gear actually that these records were made on. Maybe that's part of it. Tone poets sound great, but I prefer the energy and the drive and the smack of an original pressing. But this is a Rudy Van Gelder production, obviously, remastered by Kevin Gray, Coherent, all analog mastering. And this reissue sounds very, very close to my original. So I was really impressed with that. And once again, originals or even early reissues of this Miles material on Prestige is very, very hard to find. And OJC quality varies from the earlier days of when OJC was introduced to the latter days. So I don't know if this is one of the good sounding OJCs or not, but a classic record that should be in your collection as a jazz collector. Wayne Shorter, Night Dreamer, 1964, his debut record as a composer, though he had already written many tunes for the Art Blakey Jazz Messengers. This is my favorite Wayne Shorter record. I literally have to be in the right frame of mind to sort of accept this knowledge, because this is such a heavy, intense, incredibly beautiful record. And of all the reissues I have that I'm talking about today, this is the one that least closely mirrors the original. It's weird because this is Kevin Gray. The Working with Miles Davis is Kevin Gray, but this is nowhere near the original pressing. It still sounds good, you know, it's worth having, but the images are kind of small. The music's a little distant, but this is a great recording. If there's no other way for you to get it, this is worth buying. Made in Germany. You know, the incredible lineup of Wayne, Lee Morgan, McCoy Tyner, Reginald Workman, Elvin Jones. I mean, this is in my top 10 of greatest jazz records of all time. It just doesn't sound good as my original. You know, my original is not even in perfect shape, and it has so much more presence in power. But even so, this is a record that should be reissued. They've by and large done a good job on it. Chances are those tapes were not in great condition, or they would have sounded better than this. Woody Shaw, 1971, Blackstone Legacy. If there is a perfect jazz album, this is it. Incredibly hard to find. I had it once. Beautiful gatefold. Incredible lineup on this record, including Woody Shaw on trumpet, Gary Bartz on alto and soprano sax, Benny Maupin on tenor sax, bass clarinet, George Cables on piano, Ron Carter on bass, Clint Houston on bass, and Lenny White on drums. In many ways, this album is like a gateway record. It reflects both back on the music before it, such as Bitches Brew and all the hard bop of the 60s, but it also looks forward to funk, electric music, such as Miles did with his Lost Quintet. These are great compositions by George Cables and Woody Shaw, and this is just a profound record. Great solos, impressive compositions. You really can't say enough about this album, and it really is a pivotal record in 1971. And I mean, I grew up in the early 70s, and there was a profound difference between the 1960s and the 1970s. In a way, the 60s lasted, in my mind, in my way of thinking, up to about 1974, and then the influence of the 60s, including the influence of the Beatles, stuff like that, was over. It was no longer there as far as what you felt in your day-to-day life, or even as a young musician as I was. So this album really encapsulates the 60s and looks forward to the 70s. And it's just this is a mind-blowing record. There's amazing solos, and it's just such a kinetic atmosphere. Everything is electric, and I don't mean as far as voltage, just the relationship between these players, and such an amazing lineup. Benny Maupin, Gary Bartz, Woody Shaw, George Cables, one of George Cable's best appearances. So a profoundly great record from 1971. Let's take a left turn into Nana, Nelson, Angelo, and Novelli. This is an extremely rare Brazilian record that I found at Stranded Records here in New York. A really unusual record store. They put all their records in those frickin' Japanese sleeves that I cannot stand, because when you peel them back, that sticker is still there. It can easily rip off the stock of the record. But anyway, Stranded has amazing stock. That's also the home of Superior Viaduct here in New York. And I found so many unusual records there. I found some things I shouldn't have bought as well. But this is just a masterpiece, really. Put out by Altercat, based in Germany, I believe. Altercat does some other really great records as well. They're doing amazing reissues. I just bought one by Maria de Fatima. They've also done other Nana Vasconcelos records. Horacio Chica Barrera. Just a great label. But this record is all acoustic, reflects political upheaval in Brazil. This is 1974, I believe, the original recording. But it's just, and this is much better, in my opinion, than the Nana Vasconcelos ECM that came out recently, reissued, which just has all these strings, and it's kind of a murky recording and kind of a weird vibe. But this is astounding. There's vocalizing on here, amazing improvisation, and it's all very, it feels like you're in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, without a better way to describe it. I've been to Rio a couple of times, and Brazil is an incredible place. To me, it was much more alive, and it was much more dangerous than Europe. But so much amazing music, even the stuff pre-Bossa Nova in Brazil is astounding. Nelson Conclave is this amazing singer who is sort of like their Frank Sinatra. Of course, they have the amazing Odeon and Elenco labels publishing and releasing a lot of the records. But this is just, put this on and sit back, and it just takes over. It's subtle, it's powerful, it's funny in places, and it's, most of all, it's very mysterious, this record. Nana, Nelson, Angelo, Novella, which stands for Nelson Angelo playing guitar, pianos, keyboards, and vocals, Novelli, double bass, and Nana Vasconcelos and Berenbaugh, vocals and all percussion. This is just blew my mind, and I only bought this last week, but a great record. From 1957, The Cats. This is a perfect record recorded in 57, released in 59. With an amazing lineup. This was ostensibly a Tommy Flanagan record, I believe, but for whatever reason it became a group record. John Coltrane, Idris Suleiman, Kenny Burrell, Doug Watkins, and Louis Hayes. Part of it is, I think, I don't think these cats really played together that much. I can't think of another, someone will correct me, but I can't think of another Louis Hayes outing with John Coltrane or Idris Salomon with any of these guys. Kenny Burrell and Coltrane played together. Flanagan's kind of like Hank Jones. He played on so many great sessions in the 60s. He's one of the bedrock stalwarts of hard bop piano in the 60s. Right up to the 70s, I think, he's incredibly prolific. But this is just such a perfect record in every way. There's up-tempo stuff, there's thrilling stuff, there's kind of mellow things. Another OJC, cut by Kevin Gray, pressed at RTI. I've had an original copy of this. It didn't sound that great, but this sounds fantastic on my stereo. And they only do 5 tunes, but it's not a blowing session. Sometimes records like these turn into blowing sessions, particularly if they were on, well, this is new jazz. On Prestige, things can turn into kind of masturbatory blowing sessions, but this is not. And plus it's 1957, so John Coltrane is clean for the first time in years, and you can really hear it. His solos are so concise and coherent and powerful and strong, and that sort of lifts everyone to deliver their, just amazing performances. This epitomizes really great hard bop with a focus on, high creativity. Great record. Recorded in 1962, Full House, West Montgomery, the complete Full House recording. This is a brilliant transfer. It really puts you in the room. Even if there are some duplicated cuts, this is an amazing band. Johnny Griffin, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb. This is a very thrilling recording. And if you want to get something to familiarize yourself with a West Montgomery, or even if you're a West Montgomery completist, this will blow the walls down. He was so strong. And the liner notes are by my friend Bill Makowski. He and I have both written for Downbeat forever and Jazz Times. And he makes the point that I didn't know this, but West Montgomery could bend his thumb all the way back to his arm, which explains, he played everything with a thumb, he didn't use a pick, and that explains some of the power and the agility and the speed he plays solos with. So if you want to get a taste of West Montgomery, this is an astonishing record. Equally astonishing, from 1957, Art Pepper. This is also one of the, Mount Rushmores of hard bop. You have Miles Davis's rhythm section playing out on the West Coast. They hook up with Art Pepper, Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones. This is just a magical must-have record. Art Pepper has such a beautiful tone. His gait is he's more like an East Coast player, and I don't want to get into the whole East Coast West Coast thing, but I have a couple other records here coming up in my top jazz reissues of 2023, and it is really apparent when you look at what's happening in 1968 in New York compared to what's happening on the West Coast in 1968. It's not like two different coasts, it's like two different worlds. But this, in a way, bridges that gap because, Pepper is just effortless and plays these flowing alto lines. Beautiful tone. And what's also interesting is it's really nice to hear this amazing rhythm section recorded by Roy Dunan, cut from the original tape by Bernie Grumman. And so this is a wonderful sounding reissue. This is compared very, very favorably with my early 70s pressing. It's kind of hard to tell what pressing you have with Prestige. With Contemporary, unless you have a first pressing with the black and yellow label, which they duplicate here. But there are all these 70s reissues, probably even to the 80s, that are just those yellow Contemporary labels. But some of those sound amazing. And this, in a way, was better than my early pressing because it was super high res, more detail, but it was also full of life force and it was rich. That's something about original pressings that no reissue has, that sense of life. And it's beyond, if it's a Rudy Van Gelder record, it's beyond the mid-range being pushed. There's something else happening there. People come here and I play them a reissue in an early pressing, and you can hear it right away. Now, the early pressing might have a little more noise, not be as pretty, certainly not as lush as a Tone Poet, but there's just a real sense of life and presence there. Most notably among all these records that I have, the El Ptah Daoud or whatever, that is an amazing reissue. That is so close to my original pressing, I couldn't believe it. On the other spectrum is Wayne Shorter Night Dreamer, where the images on the reissue are kind of small, the sound is kind of recessed, but I take that to be there were problems with the tape, because it's the same exact lacquer cutter in Kevin Gray. But if you don't have this record, you should get this record and order it today. You'll be happy. They cover tunes by Art Pepper. It's Tintendeo by Chano Pozzo, Burke's Works by Dizzy Gillespie, Star Eyes, Beautiful Ballad, You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To by Cole Porter. Now, on the face of it, you would think covering an old standard like that, You'd Be So Nice to Come Home To, which I associate with Dean Martin, would be a corny vehicle. But these guys, led by Art Pepper, just make it so invigorating. And I'll get to the subject of covering old tunes in a minute when I hit some of these other recordings. Recorded in 1967, released in 1969, and withheld from public view for many years. It was originally an LT pressing, I believe. Not an LT pressing, but it was just kind of a shitty Liberty pressing. Schizophrenia by Wayne Shorter, with James Spaulding, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Curtis Fuller, Ron Carter, and Joe Chambers on drums. This doesn't have the presence and slam and invigoration and energy of my original pressing, but it's much cleaner. The separation between instruments is much better, and it's a little richer sounding. So this is a fantastic tone poet, I believe. Hats off to Joe Harley and Kevin Gray, and all the fine folks at Blue Note, including my old friend Jem Korosman. This is a no-brainer. This is a record you should have in your collection. I feel like you should have every Wayne Shorter record in your collection. He's the greatest jazz composer, at least of the latter half of the 20th century. You have Duke Ellington before him, obviously, and Mingus, but to me, Shorter's right up there with those guys. His melodies are so haunting, and there's, again, a real sense of mystery and power in the work of Wayne Shorter. And these early Blue Notes are must-haves in my book. Leroy Vinnegar, 1958. Now, this is a perfect hard bop record from the West Coast, and a totally different way of approaching jazz from this period. And they do cover, popular standards of the day like Walk On By, but then they cover stuff like On the Sunny Side of the Street, Walking My Baby Back Home. This is a really complete, beautiful, classic side from the West Coast with Victor Feldman, Gerald Wilson, Teddy Edwards, Carl Perkins, and Tony Basley, a drummer I've never heard of before. It's a beautiful, swinging, cool bop, as my friend Dan the Jazz Shepherd calls it, kind of date. You can't go wrong with buying this record. This has been reissued in many different ways because it's been a perennial popular record for as long as I know, but it is a West Coast record. And as I was saying earlier, on this record and on this Curtis Counce record, which is also led by a bass player, you hear the difference in the West and the East Coast, because when they're covering stuff like Walking My Baby Back Home, I mean, it ain't happening. I mean, Miles could cover Surrey with a Fringe on Top, which was equally sort of, in my world, a corny show tune, but you forget that because the way they play it. But because, and I'll probably take heat for this, but then is now really, California is not New York City. So New York City has it's a harder place to live. There's more energy, more friction, more fission in the streets, and you hear that in the music then as now. And so while the playing is great on here, some of the tunes, I just, Walk On By, I'll Walk Alone. I mean, so you have to kind of forget the fact that the tunes they're covering maybe aren't super, super hip. They're a little bit corny, but this, at the end of the day, is a beautifully swinging record, cut by Bernie Grunman, pressed at QRP. But all the OJC pressings are beautiful. I have found most of the reissues coming out these days from major labels all sound really good, and the pressings, in my opinion, and the jackets are usually beautiful. Only Third Man does really crummy jackets. You could rub your fingernail across a Third Man jacket, it would cut in half. Another classic hard bop, cool bop record you should have, as is Curtis Counce from the same period, 1957, on Contemporary, Curtis Counce Group. You get more bounce with Curtis Counce. They were really into the clever titles back then, weren't they? This is another classic recording led by a bass player. This record is really mellow, though, compared to this, or especially compared to Art Pepper, the rhythm section, two other contemporary reissues. This is a mellow record, but it's particularly interesting for Harold Land, who falls into the groove of the record, which, as I said, is a little mellow. Frank Butler on drums, Carl Perkins on piano, the great Jack Sheldon on trumpet. And this is, again, an easy record to love. Has been been reissued in many different ways since its original 1957, I believe, release, but it also typifies West Coast jazz of that period. But a stellar record. The Peacemaker, 1968, Harold Land, Joe Sample on piano, Bobby Hutcherson on vibes, Donald Bailey on drums, Buster Williams on bass. Good Lord, what a lineup. And it's also interesting, this is a West Coast record, recorded December 67 and February 68 at Ampex Studios, Hollywood. Reissue mastering by Ryan K. Smith. This is an incredible sounding record. And this compositionally, improvisationally, the performances, the memorable compositions, this is just a great record. I didn't really even know this record before, but I put it up on Instagram, and Greg Kaz said this is one of my favorite records. I think Sid Schwartz did as well. Actually, I have a Sid Schwartz interview coming up. But this just blew me away. In a way, this sounds like a West Coast version of a Wayne Shorter record. It's very intricate, very Jewel-like, amazing performances, particularly by Harold Land and Bobby Hutcherson. And it's funny, the Peacemaker has these weird statues on the cover, but in 1968, which is when this was released, was the height of a revolutionary feel across the world. Bobby Kennedy was about to be assassinated. Martin Luther King had already been assassinated. There were riots in France. There were riots in Michigan. I remember we had already moved south by then. We called our relatives who told us there were tanks rolling down the street. Watergate, we were on the fringes of the beginning of Watergate. America was in a very, Kent State. So the idea of the Peacemaker makes total sense, because there really wasn't much peace around the world then, like there is now. But in some ways, the 60s, it was more immediate. But this is an astounding record, an unforgettable record, a great transfer by Ryan K. Smith, and I cannot recommend this highly enough. I would have liked to have heard that Cadet box that Chris Brown talked about, but I didn't. Directions in Music, 1969 to 1972, Miles Davis, his musicians, and the birth of a new age of jazz. Thank God they didn't say new age jazz. This was put out by a label I've never heard of before, BGP. Mastered by Nick Robbins at Sound Mastering Limited, BGP based in London. And this is an incredibly well done introduction how jazz was opening up in the late 60s into the 70s. In 1970, Miles Davis unleashed Bitches Brew. It sold 1 million copies and launched a whole new style of music, jazz rock. And this really covers all the varying threads that contributed to that. There's Joe Zawinul in A Silent Way, Sweet Pea by Wayne Shorter, In Search of Truth by Lonnie Liston Smith, Adrian's Bag by John McLaughlin, a quite funny version of The Cream's Political Man by Betty Davis, and you can hear Miles talking in the beginning of the track. Gary Bartz, Miles Davis, Keith Jarrett, Chick Corea. You'll know when you get there. 2 LP set, sounds really good. If you want to hear a good introduction to the early 70s, right before jazz kind of imploded and all, then we get more into free jazz. It's interesting, the civil rights movement was more about Nina Simone and Sam Cooke and all that, but the free jazz movement, when it first hit in the U.S., was more about, Black Power, the Back to Africa movement, and that's the era I prefer. And some of this music, alludes to that. 1976, Kenny Wheeler, New High with Keith Jarrett, Dave Holland, and Jack DeJohnette. On ECM, ECM is finally getting around to reissuing their catalog, and they're doing it the right way. Beautiful gatefold with nice photos. Brand new liner notes. This one by Nick Smart. Beautiful poly-lined sleeves. This is a classic ECM record, meaning you have Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette in the rhythm section. Keith Jarrett, of course, and Kenny Wheeler has a really beautiful trumpet style and tone, and these are really great compositions. ECM, is I'm slowly going through my collection to pull out. I'm going to do a top 10 ECM records list, but sounds like no other label. Kind of ethereal at times. It's a little distant, it's a little foggy, a little misty, but incredible performances. Because everyone is really encouraged to really improvise. So these records go in some amazing places. If you want to get familiar with ECM sound, this is a great place to start. Here's an original copy I got for $5. This is, compared to the original, a little recessed sounding and small. Who knows why? Who knows why? Also from the earlier mid-70s, Japanese drummer Masahiko Togashi Quartet, Speed and Space. Now, he had recorded a lot with well-known American musicians and well-known Japanese jazz musicians in his earlier career. Then he lost the use of his legs. I don't know what caused that, but this is an amazing, if you're into free jazz, and I am, this is an amazing recording. There's a lot of space, just great soloing. It's ambient in a way, but I really dug this record. From 1961, Phineas Newborn Jr., A World of Piano, with Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones, Sam Jones, and Louis Hayes. This is a recording of pure brilliance. Newborn was on par with, or he came out of the school of Oscar Peterson. You hear Art Tatum. The guy was just an incredibly muscular, brilliant pianist. Something must have gone south in his career at some point. He made a few more records after this. He's also on Roy Haynes' We Three, I believe. But this is just pure, dazzling piano brilliance, straight ahead burning swing. And I don't even notice what the tunes are because performances are so great. Cheryl by Charlie Parker, Manteca by Dizzy Gillespie, Lush Life by Billy Strayhorn. Lush Life starts out as almost a solo piano vehicle before the group comes in a little bit later. Daoud by Clifford Brown, that's a burner. Oleo. Juicy Lucy by Horace Silver. For Carl by Leroy Vinnegar. Kabu by Roland Alexander. This is one of the top 25 greatest jazz records of all time that you should have in your collection. Along with, and now in beautifully presented form, HotHouse, the complete jazz of Massey Hall recordings. This is a 3 LP set. I recently did an interview with Nick Phillips who talked about this. This is one of the greatest transfers I've ever heard, because I remember the original pressing. The group sounds like they're down a hall, through a basement, in a bathroom somewhere. But this puts you front and center at Massey Hall, which is in Toronto, I believe, still existing. The only time all of these guys recorded together. The last time Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie recorded together that we know about, or a commercial release. And it's just brilliant. With Charlie Mingus, the first disc is the live performance, and it sounds fine. The third disc, Charlie Mingus overdubbed his bass parts, which I kind of like because it gives the whole thing a little more drive, even though the bass is too loud. The second disc really features Bud Powell, and it's an incredible Bud Powell performance. The trio, man, but this is a epic recording. This is such an important recording. When I was a kid, first getting into jazz at Massey Hall was a record you had to get, because not only is it an introduction to bebop, even though a lot of these tunes aren't bebop tunes, there's no Now's the Time or Confirmation. It's incredible performances. And it's such a weird record in some ways. Charlie Parker's playing a white plastic alto. There's a Rocky Graziano fight that night. So Dizzy Gillespie keeps leaving the stage apparently and going back to check out the progress of the fight. But you can also really hear the audience, and you can hear Dizzy Gillespie talking off mic, which in no way mars the fidelity of this thing. But a wonderful performance. And these rare box set reissues, this isn't a box, but it's a triple LP with a beautiful sleeve. You know, once they're sort of pressed, they're kind of done. They become very collectible. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some free jazz. This is a record I had for years and didn't know what the heck it was, or even who it was, but they reissued it. It was an ESP disc, Free Music 1 and 2, with a bunch of musicians I never really have heard of before. Recorded at Wellsome in an old farmhouse. Anyway, this is a beautiful example of early 70s free jazz, actually recorded in 1968. I think one of the top 20 free jazz records. You know, if you're not into free jazz, you don't understand it, to me what you do with free jazz is you just sit down and let it wash over you. You come in with no judgments, no preconceptions, because you're not going to hear a head in a solo, in a verse, in a bridge. It's not about that. It's just like sitting back and letting it wash over you. Now, not all that music works in that context. As I said, I can't really do it with the Coltrane records, those latter period ones. Even though I love Interstellar Space, which is Coltrane with Rashid Ali, but some of the Coltrane stuff is just, get out of the way, because machine. But this is beautifully played. It's a very rare record. I was kind of shocked to see it when I first bought it like 10 years ago. I didn't know what it was, but I dug the way it sounds. So, and two other classic free jazz standards, NOMMO with Don Pullen and Milford Graves, and Babi with Milford Graves, both with new liner notes by John Corbett. a fine writer, featuring the drummer's singular polyrhythmic approach along with the ecstatic wailing of saxophonist Arthur Doyle and Hugh Glover. There's also another reissue 2LP with Hugh Glover and Milford called Children of the Forest, I believe. This was a 1968 concert at Yale. I prefer this to this because you have Milford in one channel, Don Pullen in the other, and Milford's playing almost a little more conventionally. He's playing sustainable, recognizable rhythms. As we're on this, he is just all over the place. Milford had no toms on his lower heads, which was the thing in the early 70s to the mid 70s. He took the snares off his snare drum, so it's more, I don't want to say tribal approach, it's more of a lower mid-range sound. It's so propulsive. And I saw Milford play a few times. I interviewed him once. He was kind of irascible. But what you saw him play was not what you heard. He was like a magician on the instrument. He was mixing Afro-Cuban with Brazilian, with free, with his own conception. Later in his life, he studied the heart. He taught at Bennington College. He was a renowned professor there. I interviewed with him. He was just a profound musician. And this is what I'm talking about with this music. You just sit back and let it flow over you. It's really beautiful. Finally, the UHQR of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. I don't think I need to tell you anything about this record, but I will talk to you about the different sound quality between this and my original pressing. The original pressing is a little murky, but is very earthy sounding. This is very extremely beautifully layered, has better dynamics than my original pressing. Everything is very separate, has good tone, and it's incredibly detailed. In a way, it's almost everything you want from a high-res pressing. But I'm totally happy with my original pressing as well, which has nowhere near the level of resolution this has, but it's a beautiful recording reissue nonetheless. Forgot to mention my favorite jazz box reissues, starting out with Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Shirley Scott, Cooking with Jaws and the Queen. Beautifully realized Nick Phillips project. 4 LPs, including Smokin', Eddie Lockjaw Davis with Shirley Scott, and the various cookbooks, which these are taken from. Cookbook 1, 2, and 3. It's interesting, if you find these pressings out in the wild, they're always extremely well played. So it's hard to find one that is in really good shape. And they also, on the various early reissues, if you can find them, there are different covers for the same records. So it's hard to know what you're getting. And plus, Lockjaw did other records for Prestige, which I really love these records. This is old school, all the way, organ trio jazz to a degree. Lockjaw is a singular, powerful figure, as was Shirley Scott. So I really love this reissue. These sound pretty damn close to my originals. But the good thing is I don't have to play my originals anymore. I can just play this. Not really a single reissue, not really a box set, rather. It is 2 LPs, Pharoah, covering Harvest Time from 1971. So you have the original disc, which is really beautiful and meditative. One of these kind of miracles that happens in spite of the circumstances surrounding it. This was originally on Indian Navigation. I think Pharoah was growing increasingly unhappy with his label at that point. This includes letters between the label and Pharoah, where they're sort of going into it. But then it also has 2 versions live of Harvest Time, and they're both very different. One is faster, different musicians, but throughout it all it's just the soaring, meditative tone of Pharoah Sanders. A beautiful box set, plus it comes with all kind of little cool tchotchkes. Equally cool, Ornette Coleman, Genesis of Genius, the contemporary albums. Get all his contemporary records in one spot. And we have a giveaway, and I emailed the fellow who won the 3 Sounds record, but he has not responded. So I'll have to do an addendum. I have 2 more videos coming up that deal with the past year, and there will be giveaways on both of those. One of them will be my favorite new jazz records of 2023 with artists who are actually alive, and then my top finds of 2023. Just records I was just really psyched that I even got a hold of them. So as always, thanks for watching. If you like what I'm trying to do, if you like what I'm doing, please press that like and subscribe button, and happy holidays, folks.